before we get into the show, make sure to do a couple things. First of all, click the subscribe button down below and make sure to turn on your notifications, please, in order to get updated content that I start to put out. I do put out weekly videos, so hopefully you enjoy those. The second thing you can do is to make sure to be empathetic and understanding for all of my guests that come on this show, but otherwise, enjoy the show. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Deep Dives into the Minds of Esports. My name is Blake Panashevitz, and I'm excited to announce today's guest. He was a coach for Luminosity Gaming, Optic Academy, Last Night's Leftovers, and he is now the analyst for the Washington Justice. Please let me introduce Mikael Skjønhaug, maybe better known as mKL, and I think I fucked up your last name.
I mean, it was pretty good. Oh. The amount of butchering my names is pretty fun.
Okay. So like, it's funny because I always talk about this with guests, but like having a last name like Panashevitz, you think that I might be somewhat adept at saying like hard last names, but I am in no way adept at saying last names at all.
I mean, I also have like the most Scandinavian last name you could possibly have as well. Like there's like the hard, like the ooh sounds and stuff. So
yeah, so that's going to bring us into some interesting conversations here. You're 22 years old. You're working for Washington Justice, but you've had a very interesting kind of life getting up to where you are now, and that's kind of something that I'm excited to deal with. You're my first guest, I think, to my knowledge, that is from Norway. I've had a lot of German guests on this show, but no one from Norway, so that's kind of cool. And I kind of want to, I'm going to pick your brain on some of that because I want to know what Norway is kind of like. Like, what was it like growing up there? What was the experience like there? How bad is the internet there? You know, really the entire like 9 yards of what it's like growing up in Norway. But even cooler than that is like part of your history is you actually traveled to Taiwan for a little bit and lived there for a while. So you have a very interesting career getting up to the Washington Justice. You weren't involved with an Owl team last year, which when I looked at your history, I thought was kind of surprising, actually, like coming from some of the teams that you'd moved from. But you're here now. So we're gonna kind of start it off a little bit easy. Very, very easy question to kind of start this entire thing out. What is it that you like to do for fun? What is it that like you enjoy doing for fun?
So the big thing right now is finding something me and my girlfriend can do together when I actually have time out. So, and then combining that with probably just getting fresh air. So a mixture of gaming and fresh air has been Pokemon Go actually. So that's kind of been like, I like going deep into that game because there's a lot of like calculations and stuff. So Pokemon Go has been like my go-to thing outside of Overwatch lately.
Okay. That brings, I didn't like the whole girlfriend thing. That's got to be something that's really hard to balance with the Overwatch. Like I know that when I was working with Gladiators, like me and my girlfriend have been dating for almost 5 years now, and we were doing long distance too because she's an engineer. She is the moneymaker in our relationship. So that being said, it was very challenging. Like first of all, being long distance, but also then dealing with the fact that the Overwatch schedule, at least last year, was incredibly tense. And from what I have heard so far, it does not seem that much better this season. So depending on the team that you're on, those extra days that maybe you could take off seem to be utilized for practice, kind of like I thought that they would.
we have a lot of those off days, you know, that are there's no scripts, but it's still the same amount of work. So I mean I feel bad for her, but she does fine. Like she understands the situation. So when I have time, I try to spend it with her. I try to bring her together on most of the stuff that I do. Like if I go out for, like, say I was on a podcast yesterday, I would bring her with me so she could like be with me. I was in Glendale and we spent some time after, stuff like that.
That's really cool. So you're really trying to give her the experience of esports. Did she come from knowing what esports was, or was she kind of someone who was on the outside and you were like, let me show you this cool world? Because that's what I do with my girlfriend.
Funnily enough, about me and my girlfriend, we actually met when I was with the Taiwanese team. We met in Taiwan. And then so she's been on and off living in Taiwan and living in California. So luckily enough, she has her family here in California. So she's only like an hour away from her parents right now because we live in Pasadena. Well, she's originally from Irvine, or she lives in Irvine. So at least like for you had long distance while working those insane hours. At least we live together. Like she's in my apartment.
Okay, that's pretty nice. It's got to be that's got to be really good for like the emotional support of like the entire. Not to shame the Washington Justice, but especially like how your season has went so far. I imagine it is extremely stressful, and that is not saying anything bad on you. Just the amount of stress that you go through normally, even if you're winning. And like the Gladiators did fairly well last year, and the amount of stress that we were under, I couldn't imagine being a team that was not actually doing well. And
it's also the transition from doing the tier 2 stuff to going into tier 1. It's been like a hard transition. Like, and then also originally, like my original title was analyst, but I've been moving more into a coaching role, so I've been getting more like tasks within the team. So there's been a lot of transitional stuff and like a lot of learning for me this stage. So while you're trying to learn and work at the same time, it kind of just adds up, and then we're talking 12 hours, 13 hours days, and then travel back, and you want to spend a little bit of time with the girlfriend, but like you're too tired anyway, so you just pass out.
Yeah, that would be kind of rough. So let's take it back a step. Let's take it back actually like a lot of steps. Okay, so you grew up in Norway, and you lived in Norway most of your life, right? Okay, so what is Norway like? What was growing up in Norway like for you?
Cold.
Okay, how cold? Okay, because I come from Michigan. In Michigan, it snows probably 7 months out of the year, roughly.
Yeah, so around 8-9 months a year, it's fairly cold. Our summers are pretty decent. So, I mean, culturally, Norway, I haven't felt that. Like, I come from smaller towns, so like coming to LA has been kind of a culture shock. Like with the skyscrapers, all the like the traffic and stuff like that. I haven't experienced traffic before because I come from a town with maybe 30,000-40,000 people living in it. So like I would know everyone there. Like I would go to the grocery store and I would know everyone. I would go to a bar and I would know everyone. That's probably like one of the bigger differences. Like I would just always know who I was there with. Like I didn't have to plan stuff. I would just know the people that were there when I went there anyways.
Yeah, because I also come from a fairly small town, and that was one of the things that is a little bit, the culture in LA is a lot different than like a smaller town because, well, first of all, like it seems like in smaller towns, people, because they know everyone, they tend to be a lot nicer and like willing to help each other out. And in LA, it's a very single person mindset. It is all about like the individual most of the time, it feels like, going through this. So do you have any brothers or sisters?
I have one younger brother.
Okay, how much younger is he?
He's 18 now, so he's 3 years younger than me.
Okay, 3 years. Okay, so what was it like growing up being the older brother? Because I'm also an older brother. So what was your experience about it? Because mine sometimes was not always the most pleasant.
Yeah, so growing up, it was like you have 3 years of all the attention from your parents, and then suddenly a little guy comes in and he steals all the attention. Like it's also just my brother's personality. Like he's like kind of like I like to be a bit more reserved, and my brother's very out there. So and then. We like growing up, we didn't really get along. I don't think that's very common for like an age gap type brothers, like because we didn't have a lot of common interests growing up. But like the later years, like me and my brother's been getting on perfectly. Like he's one of my best motivators in like doing esports and stuff. Because even though you make a decent living, you have an apartment. In tier 2, it's kind of free for all battle royale shit where like you kind of have to scrape by, you almost dumpster dive day to day. So growing up with my brother, we didn't have a great relationship. We just didn't have a lot of common interests, but that evolved over time. It's like we grew up and we kind of both found common interests.
So when you say that you didn't have a great relationship, so like me and my brother, we got along fairly well, but a lot of it was because our parents were divorced, and so like our relationship to some degree, due to the circumstances that had happened with us, with like my mother and my stepdad being abusive and stuff, it caused us to be fairly close, but we'd still fight, and we'd fight fairly like if we weren't helping each other, then a lot of times we were fighting. All right, so like what type of relation? When you say it wasn't like the best, was it just mostly that you just left each other alone,
like we just like as kids we would fight just because like your parents would try to keep you together all the time, and like we just didn't have that much like in common. And it was like, I mean, he was like 5 years, 6 years old, and what does 6-year-old kids do? They don't really think, right? So like he would like punch, he would like bite, stuff like that. But like towards like his early teens, my like mid-teens, like we would just avoid each other because I mean we didn't really have much to talk about.
So what was school like in Norway? What was it like to go to school? Were you a popular kid? Were you not a popular kid? What was it like growing up in Norway?
I was never. I mean, I wouldn't say I was like bullied, but I wasn't super popular. I had my group of friends during. Like it's kind of like Norwegian schools aren't that great. Like I tend to like emphasis like splitting people. Like there's a lot of like group stuff all the time for some reason, and then that kind of creates a lot of divides. So like there wasn't like the popular jocks, which is like these people that were friends with these people and those people that were friends with those people, and like some people would get picked on because they looked weird and stuff like that. Like I wasn't picked on mostly. I just had my few friends and we got along great.
Okay. So when you say the school system is kind of, it separates people by creating groups, what do you mean by that? Like, how is that set up? Like, how is your school system set up in Norway?
So for elementary school, I feel like it's very similar to other schools, but we just like, I just remember having a lot of group assignments. And then also in Norway, there's like the soccer group of people. So like the soccer people would go together. Then there's like we have like snowboarders, skiing people that would get along, etc. And then like other types of sports. Like a lot of it actually came from sports. Thinking about it, like depending on which sports you played, you would hang around with your group of sports people, and then the people who didn't do sports would like have like the video games, or whatever.
So I take it you didn't play much sports then.
I actually played a lot of sports. So in my younger years, I played soccer, I played hockey. I did like 3 years of taekwondo. Because I don't know why I wanted to, but I mean that was just something I wanted to do. I also was very big into like not the cross country skiing. What do you call like the downhill?
Downhill.
Yeah, like twin tip and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I was into a lot of that. So most of my friends early on were like from those groups. That's kind of why like as I grew up, I shifted a lot of my friends because like I lost interest in soccer, I lost interest in like skiing and stuff like that, and more into video games. So like, I kind of like had a group, like a period where like I had to like transition my friend group in a sense, which was kind of awkward.
So when did you stop giving up sports? What age did you say I'm not really into this anymore and I'm gonna kind of?
I think I quit soccer around 13. Skiing. So the reason I quit skiing is I still really enjoy skiing. It's just the equipment is like insanely expensive. And growing up with a family that didn't have that much money, we're like scraping by paycheck to paycheck. Like I didn't feel like I always tried to be the least possible like burden on our money, right? So I would always just like try to stay to myself, not waste money.
Yeah. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I actually used to snowboard, and it was also very, very expensive to snowboard. So you mentioned that you didn't come from a very financially secure family. That you were living paycheck to paycheck. What do your parents do?
So my mom's been out sick for a majority of when I've been alive. She tried to go back to study for a short period when I was younger, but I mean she fell sick, and then she's kind of been a stay-at-home mom after. And then my dad's worked his way up in the like electrical business. So like he started out just like as an electrician, but now he's worked himself up. So now they're making comfortable living at least.
Yeah, I know that growing up, my dad actually had gotten a brain tumor, and I remember us being very, very poor because he couldn't go to work anymore. And I for me, like I didn't really realize what was going on, but like there was moments where like we were getting food from like a church at one point because we couldn't afford food, and I was like, wow, this is not necessarily, and it doesn't really click all the time, and then, until it finally does, and you're like, oh wow, we don't have money. So what happened to your mom that caused her to fall ill?
She's just had struggles with her back. So like doing any sort of physical stuff has always been and she's like, so one thing she's been doing lately is like going to the gym a lot, which has helped her, but still like she doesn't really have the energy and to like get a proper job. She's been working part-time here and there, but she still struggles a lot. So
yeah, back issues can be very, very like there's not a lot you can do about them a lot of times. It's just kind of like you have to like suffer with this, and that's a terrible thing that you had to kind of deal with. That must have been a lot of burden on you being the oldest child. Then you must have had to take a lot of responsibility kind of around the house then.
Yeah, I always try to find ways to support my parents, my family as a whole growing up, which is why I felt like when I started doing esports, it kind of made me feel a lot guilty because I kind of felt like I was giving up on my family and chasing my own dream in a sense. So I felt a bit selfish picking like this line of work. Like at the stage I'm at right now, I'm pretty happy because I'm able to like send money back and support my family like paycheck to paycheck, which makes me feel pretty good. Like I feel like I reached a point where I can give back. But growing up, I would like try to, as I said, like be the least possible as a like a budget burden, etc. And I mean, just try to help out where I could.
Yeah, that must that is that what one of the reasons why you started to stay more at home and kind of get more into video games, because it's generally it's fairly a less financial burden. Like you don't require people to go out. You don't need to get rides anywhere.
Yeah, I didn't like to like have my dad drive me everywhere. Like if I could walk, I would try to walk, stuff like that. And then the video games were like a mix of that. Like I didn't have to spend that much money. Like I would get my games, and then I could do whatever. And then also just a mix of the people I started hanging out with around middle school were very into like Call of Duty, CS:GO, or not CS:GO, but like CS Source and 1.6 stuff like that.
Okay, so you're growing up and through school, and you mentioned that you have your group of friends. Was there anything that like really stood out about growing up and going through school that was like an important moment for you? Did you get to have a bunch of like events that generally people consider to be like longstanding and important events in their life? So a good example is like in the United States, prom is a pretty big deal. Like when people go to proms and it's like dance, it's like one huge dance that gets basically thrown. That is,
I mean, most of the things that like stuck with me was like going between the different schools, because we have elementary school year 1 through 7, then we have middle school year 8 through 11, and then we have like high school. So between each shift, like I kind of realized like less and less how important popularity was.
Yeah.
Like I always tried to be like the people pleaser that would like I would feel happy if people like acknowledged me and like gave me attention. Kind of, I felt like that's kind of because like how my brother kind of took all the attention when he was growing up. So I tried to gain attention elsewhere. So growing up, I kind of learned that like I would just give less of a shit in a sense about what other people thought about me and develop myself instead of developing to be someone else, like what like other people want from me.
So that must have been like you mentioned growing up and you needing to be a people pleaser. At what point did that really start to change? Being like, I don't need to make these people happy in order to feel happy, because that's a pretty big step in anyone's life. Like, right? I need to care more about like what is best for me than necessarily other people. Like, when did that shift start to occur, and what kind of made the onset of that?
I think it was high school. Because then I'd had a stable group of friends, and I gained a lot more friends going into high school. Because in Norway, in high school, you pick kind of how you do universities in America.
Yeah.
You pick like where you want to work towards. So like instead of picking like computer science, you pick like IT, for example, like more basic stuff to like give you building blocks. So first year I did like my first 3 years was like electrical, like the electro like. I don't know how to describe it in English, but it's like around the, like being like an electrical engineer and stuff like that.
Okay.
So the people I met there were very like-minded. I was going in with my already established group of friends, and then I met a lot more friends. So I felt very confident with like I didn't have to constantly stress about like losing my friends and being like alone. I always had people to talk to. I always had people to like hang out with. So that kind of made me like realize that like they like me for who I am, not for like trying to please them. So I was myself, and that felt like pretty good actually. So like, holy shit, I can like I'm actually not that stupid. I'm actually not that incompetent in a sense.
So you talk about those feelings like that. Did you have a lot of self-doubt kind of growing up about yourself? Like, were you someone who was like, well, I'm not that smart, or oh, I'm not a good person, or did you have a lot of negative thinking like that?
I would think so, yeah. Like one thing, I was never good with school before I had those changes, like mentally, because I was like one thing was that I was always told by my teachers that, oh, you're so much smarter than this. Like I would have pretty good grades, but they always knew that I could do more because I always did bare minimum. Because like, I mean, probably feelings of like self-doubt, like I didn't feel that I was like worth it, etc. And then as the years progressed, I kind of became like in high school, it changed from just not feeling like I could, and then it kind of just changed into, oh, I'm doing gaming. Like I did Overwatch like towards the later years of my high school, and then that kind of like fell into like second. But yeah, growing up, I don't know. I can't really pinpoint why, but I just never took school that serious. I always had. Sorry about that. I always had like good enough grades to kind of do whatever I want, but I never wanted to push for that like percentage more. You know, I always just like did bare minimum for what I could do, and then get the grades that would please my parents in a sense.
That makes sense. So you were just looking to make them happy, but then kind of enjoy the rest of your time and what your work you were putting in for, which makes a lot of sense to kind of go through there and do that. I know that for me, I didn't really try that hard throughout. I actually didn't like school at all. I just did not enjoy it at all. I didn't like anything about it. And it wasn't until like my later years of college that I actually started to actually do well in like school. Because I'd figured out like, okay, well, this is what I actually want to do. And so I think a lot of it has to do with that. Because a lot of times you get put doing stuff that is very monotonous and very unneeded for what life is kind of in general. So you finish school up. Okay, and you mentioned like Overwatch starting to come in here and starting to be an important role. Did that start to did that have an effect on like schooling? Did like video gaming ever have an effect on? Because like if you look at like a lot of pro players, there's like an actual like point in their life where things like shift. Like maybe they were actually doing well up into school, and then something happened, and they end up shifting, and then like all that time is in Overwatch, and there tends to be a lot of correlation between how they're doing in school.
Yeah, so my last year of high school, so I did, I think 2 years of high school doing the electrical stuff, and then I shifted into IT-based stuff, because that's like, you don't have to do the first year, you go straight into second year of IT, and it's only a 2-year course. So that year, towards the mid part of that school year, I got into Overwatch. I joined my first team, because I was back in close beta. I met Siny and Kratos, who got me an account, and then school kind of took a huge second gear. I missed a lot of classes because I was busy being addicted to this new video game, and then me and my parents had, because I was for that school I had to move like on my own, so I was living about an hour 30 minutes away from home, so they didn't really know what's going on. I kept missing a lot of classes. I was so when you live on your own in Norway, you get like support from the school to pay for rent, pay for food.
Yeah.
And I was at the point where like if I didn't start showing up, I would literally get kicked out of like my apartment, because I wouldn't get any more money. So like I got those warning towards the end of the year. So kind of to like go back to my point that like I could do bare minimum and still get passing grades. Like I didn't care about school at all, and then I would show up like for the exams, and I would get like 5s or 6, which is like the highest and second highest grade in Norway.
Yeah.
So that's kind of why like I never tried in school, because I always felt like I could do bare minimum and still get above like average in class.
So it felt like you were never actually challenged in school. Like most of it wasn't, I hate you. I hate you. Oh my God, school is so hard for me growing up. Oh, feels bad. So you finish school out. You're obviously highly invested into Overwatch already. Like you're already starting to play it. Did you ever think about going on to college? Was that ever a thought that occurred to your mind that, oh, I'm finishing up school here. College is probably, I'm imagining that's what your parents probably thought and wanted you to do to some degree, but.
Yeah, so I think during school was my first LAN. I think the Tech TV LAN in Germany was still when I was at school. So I asked my teacher if I could take 4 days off school to go to this LAN, because he knew about the esports stuff, and he really he actually thought it was really cool. So he supported my like going to Germany for like 4 days, and he would like if I did my work while I was in Germany. So I was already under an org at the time while still in school.
Okay, so when you say you were underneath an org, okay, this is like an important distinction and clarification. Were you getting paid like a salary?
No, I wasn't being paid. It was just we were getting like sponsor stuff, but there was no like salary involved. So after high school ended, I asked my parents if I could take like 1 year to pursue this esports thing. So I did my year. I had my ups and downs, and then I think at the end of that was around Talon. So after I came home, like after being in Taiwan for about 2 or 3 months, I was pretty set on actually going to college. I had to pick up a few subjects to get enough grades to go to where I wanted to go. So I was looking into doing some classes, but then I didn't have the money for taking those classes. Because taking classes after you've already completed high school is pretty expensive. So I got a job at a gas station, and I worked the night shift, which was a very depressing experience. It was not a job I enjoyed, and it was like a terrible shift. So, but I think while I was working there was when I started talking with Spazo when they were building Optic Academy. So while I had plans to go back to school, I had kind of given up on Overwatch. I was doing a team called Squid in Europe with Decod, Nex, and Sharp, but I kind of let that, like, that was just like a side hobby project to keep my mentality not from imploding doing this fucking depressing job at a gas station. But yeah, when I got the Optic opportunity, I kind of went against my parents and I moved to Texas to pursue Overwatch again, because I kind of felt like if it's an academy, it's a lot more reachable to make OWL than it is doing other stuff.
Yeah. So let's talk about like your time in Taiwan, because that's a very unique experience, and it was probably a huge like cultural difference. Like we talk about the cultural difference between like Norway and like LA. I imagine that it was a fairly big difference getting to go to Taiwan. So first of all, how did you get into a team that is involved in Taiwan? Right. That's how did you make that transition?
So I think before Taiwan was around the time that I was with Tempo Storm as a player, and then they heard about me because of Luminosity Gaming a while back. So I got this random email saying, I don't remember what it was saying, but it seemed super sketchy. But I figured I would ask him about this. It was from this guy named Sean, who is still running Talon, and then he wanted to hire an established coach for his up and coming team. That they still haven't picked up any players. They wanted me to be there, and like due to their early stages. So I mean, he just saw some articles about me back in the day about Luminosity, and he thought I'd be a good start for the team.
Okay, that seems fairly simple, actually. I was expecting more of a story. So what was it like living in Taiwan?
Very, very, very different. First of all, we have a team of 6 Chinese players. So I didn't speak the language. I
was just going to ask you, did they speak any English at all?
We had 2 players who spoke very broken, bare minimum English. We had a manager who could do translations, but he wasn't always there because he had university. So a lot of the time, I was just stuck living with people I couldn't understand, living in a part of the world where I didn't really knew what was going on. So Taiwan was, I wouldn't say great, but it was interesting at least.
Okay, so it seems like it was very stressful. How did you work with people who you couldn't communicate with? Because we see it all the time in Overwatch League where people are like, well, language barrier. And having worked with a multi nationality team, right, with lots of different languages coming in there, it is a very hard thing to do. That is not something that you can like scoff at. It's something that is actually very, very difficult and slows everything down dramatically. So how did you deal with working with an all Chinese roster?
One thing people completely forget is that how like hindering having to have everything translated is, because you lose so much context, you lose so much of like the tempo of even how you're talking to like explain the how important it is, like when you have to take 2-minute breaks just to have someone translate it for you. And how do you even know if that guy is translating exactly what you're thinking about, right?
Yep.
Because like hiring someone who's bilingual is fine. Hiring someone who's bilingual and understands the game the same as the coach is near impossible.
Yeah.
Because so Taiwan I learned a lot, and I'm happy that I learned a lot, but I wouldn't say it was the best of times. It was very, very challenging, very, very stressful.
Yeah, because you can't, especially if you use any sort of analogies, those do not, from what I've heard, those do not translate very well. And especially like working in like mental health, analogies are very good because they tend to shift the thinking from being what someone is used to thinking and to get them on a different path, so that way you can kind of reroute the way that the thinking process works. So like I use analogies all the time, and that does not work very well with translation. So I imagine that was very, very difficult. But I mean, you're on a team now that has different languages, and while you have some people who obviously know the game very well and also speak those languages, which is probably a big plus for that. I can't imagine it was easy, and I don't even know how you'd start to come at that. You mentioned that it sounds like it was very stressful, but that was also the time that you seem to have met your girlfriend as being over in Taiwan. I
would say that was probably the best part about that entire trip.
I kind of figured you would.
Significant.
Yeah. So where did you two meet? Like, how did you two meet in Taiwan? That's such an odd thing.
I mean, it's somewhat racist the way I explain it, but it's also like when you're like Taiwan is like probably one of the places on earth with the least amount of tourism, right?
Yeah.
So when there's two white people in the same room, you kind of like feel inclined to talk to each other because like I think that was probably the second or third white person I'd seen while I was there for those 3 months. So I mean, we just got talking, we exchanged numbers. I was at my absolute lowest low at that time. Probably I was I think we just lost in the OPR thing, like the qualification. So I had spent all this time, all this stress. I almost completely cut ties with my parents at this point. I didn't talk to my friends because the time zones, I couldn't talk to anyone.
Yeah.
So the only people I was interacting with was the people I was working with, who also didn't understand me when I talked anyways. So the only real interaction I had while in Taiwan was either with the owner or with our manager. So like just getting to talk to someone who first of all understood me, even what I was saying, and then who I actually clicked with. And then it was probably the first time in a very long time I talked about anything outside of gaming. Like it was just a breath of fresh air because like she didn't fucking understand what I was doing. She thought I was being an idiot. Like she thought my job was like the weirdest thing because she was just like, I mean, I call her a normie. She was just a normie.
Yeah.
And that was very refreshing, actually.
I completely can understand that, like the divide there. Kind of looking at it now, I don't think I'd actually want to date someone who knows esports. Like, it's nice to get a break from like the work. So it was nice bringing her in because she can appreciate like the games as like a fan. She can be like a kind of like, well, I really think these teams are cool. I'm gonna root for like the Skjønhaug Dragons because they're not winning any games this season. And I'm like, yeah, this is enough. You're not totally in. You're like peeking your head in, and it's a very nice thing that I can walk out. So I can completely understand. So mental stress, that's something that gets brought up, or like mental health in general gets brought up in like Overwatch and really esports in general. And for me, because I work in mental health, I think it has a significantly long way to go. But it sounds like working with Talon, you went underneath a fair amount of mental stress and suffered. So what was that like? Like, what was it like being in that low moment? Because there's obviously other people who go through low moments. What was it like for you?
I think it was just a feeling of absolute like isolation. Like I was so far from anything I knew. Like I couldn't even go get food alone because like I couldn't ask a store clerk what I wanted because he wouldn't understand me, right? Like either I would have to like point at a sign, or like I would have to bring one of the players with me to like get like a pseudo translation from one of the English speaking players. So I just felt isolated. I had no one to vent to. Like I couldn't talk about, oh, I fucking hate my boss. I fucking hate the players. I didn't have anyone to like our teams are great, but sometimes we have bad moments and like you get upset at people, and like having someone to just vent to is like absolutely necessary. So that's why like everything felt so great when I met Crystal. Like I just had someone to talk to. And it didn't have to be about Overwatch because like my mind had been on purely Overwatch 12 hours, like every single waking moment for the last 2 months. I was like getting burnt out. I was not in a great mental place. Like I cut ties with my family, which I always valued like the family as a whole. Like I always wanted to like do the best for the family. So it was just like a lot of depression, a lot of just feeling completely isolated. So being let go of Talon was like probably like one of the biggest reliefs, actually.
So that brings me to a couple other questions. You mentioned that you had to cut ties with your family, at least briefly. What was that experience like? Like, was there a point where like, listen, I'm going to do this no matter what? Like, what was that conversation like? Because that would be a very, very hard conversation to have.
So for a very long time, me and my mom have a lot of like, not even misunderstandings, but like we have a lot of arguments. Like,
Yeah.
she's like I still respect my mom a lot. I'm very like, our relationship now is pretty good, but back then she, how to say it, like, because I felt like I was dealt a once in a lifetime chance to music for thing. Like, not a lot of people get the opportunity, so I wanted to like pursue my rock star dream in a sense.
Yeah.
And my dad was always very supportive, kind of very lenient. He wouldn't be very strict, but my mom was very like the opposite, very strict. And she was like, "But you should do school, etc., etc." So the pay for talent wasn't exactly great either. So moving that far away, making what in Taiwan is fairly decent money, but back home was practically nothing.
Yeah.
It just seemed like I was like completely insane in her eyes. So actually, right before I was supposed to move out, she kind of threw me out of the house. So I had to stay at my friend's house for a week before I got my plane to Taiwan.
That must have been really, really hard then, because it wasn't so much that you cut off, is that you both were just at odds, and then she did this thing where she throws you out, and I imagine that there was a lot of anger, and you were like, okay, I'm not going to talk to you for a while. Why didn't you talk to your dad while you were in Taiwan?
I mean, I tried to talk to him, but still the time zones. Like, I have a good relationship with them now, but I still just can't talk to them that much because it would have to be early in the morning. Well, I'm like, I'm usually like scrambling to get to work in the morning, and then they go to bed when I arrive at the house, in a sense.
That makes sense. So you this thing doesn't work out with Talent Esports, really. You are at a low point in your life. You get let go. There's some relief probably for being let go, or to leaving and going back home. But I imagine that conversation back home was not something that was exactly like pleasant, was it? Like I imagine if I'm understanding how I would react if I had said, well, you need to go to college, and then you didn't listen to me, and then you left, and then you came back being like, oh shit, this didn't work out, I might be a little bit egotistical, like, wow, it's kind of like I told you so.
Yeah. Actually, funnily enough, that was one of the times that we started building our relationship. Like I just came home and I apologized. I was being a fucking dickhead. I shouldn't have left in the first place. And then I told her my plans of getting a job so I can take classes, start studying. And then she was very understanding because I was doing a normal people lifestyle where I was just getting back to work and stuff like that. So, like, we were pretty good for a while. But we would still have our occasional arguments due to misunderstanding, which is normal.
Yeah, it's fairly normal. So, you get back. What made you say, screw this, I'm done with esports? Was it just your whole experience with talent that was like, okay, this is it. I don't want to do this. There's no point in trying to pursue this rockstar dream. It's not worth it. Because obviously that changed. But when you first come back, there must have been a lot of resentment towards like the scene in general and how it was handled.
I just felt like the scene, like I gave everything and I kind of just got nothing for it. Like I had my opportunities early on. I feel like I kind of made the wrong choices going forward to like push my career. So I was kind of like, okay, I think I've spent my time. I've had my fun. It's time to move on in a sense.
That makes a lot of sense. So you're going through, you're like, I'm going to go do this school thing now. You start working at a night shift job and it's miserable because, first of all, if anyone's worked night shift is fucking awful. It is an awful shift to work. It is not fun, and you are on this weird time schedule compared to everyone else, much like living in a different country. Actually, and so you're trying to save money for the school thing, and you most likely hate your job, and you're probably playing games to get away from that to some degree. But then this opportunity with Optic comes up. How does that entire thing come up?
I mean, it was just due to
originally
I was still working with a team called Squid. I was doing like an open division thing in Europe for first season open division. So the Optic thing came up with. I was like, okay, Squid is probably not going to go anywhere. So like I'm going to do my best to get my players into good teams, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I knew that Spazzo was working with Optic Academy, so I tried to get. I got Sharp in, which everyone knows because Sharp was there for season 1. I tried to get Nex as well because I felt Nex was like this insane talent that really deserves a chance. And just due to talking with Spazzo and eventually starting to talk with Alicus, I was offered a role on Optic as a coach / analyst type deal.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. So you go to Optic, and was that a hard conversation with your parents then? Was it, again, much like the Taiwan, like, hey, you shouldn't be doing this, you should be going back to school?
It felt more legit. Like, first of all, it was like, for them, their perspective, like they don't really understand the legitimacy of orgs, but they understand that like, a Texas type situation is probably more legit than a Taiwan type situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this time she didn't have to throw me out. At least she wasn't overly happy with me pursuing this thing, but she also knew that like this was something I really burned for. Mm-hmm. And she knows how having a dream that you really burn for is, and like she wanted to be supportive in the best way she could.
Mm-hmm. So you end up going to Optic. What was Optic like compared to all the orgs before, and what was it like compared to like what you've been to now? Like what were the differences between it?
Compared to what I experienced in LNL and even now, Optic was fairly terrible. Looking back, Optic wasn't a great experience. Mm-hmm. Like it wasn't like it wasn't built right as a whole, but given the experience.
I was going to ask you, see, you mentioned it, right? Obviously, there was a lot that came out about Optic later on, especially related towards like Alicus and stuff like that. And I don't know how much you can go into it due to NDAs or anything like that. How much of that stuff is actually true?
From an org perspective, we were kind of looked down upon as a whole from the Optic org. Yeah. We were kind of pushed aside. They didn't really care about the academy team as a whole. So, like, I don't know if you remember this, but Kaiser made a tweet about not having a monitor, which almost got him kicked off the team. But that was also that was a month after we arrived, and that was when our subs finally got their monitors. A month after we couldn't play our subs ever. Kaiser didn't get any playtime because he just didn't have a fucking computer or monitor.
Okay, so like you guys were like second-hand players.
Yeah, like they just really didn't care. Our living situation was for contenders. I think it was okay. We had somewhere to live, which is better than most people. But like compared to the higher like contender teams, because like Optic we were top 4. Yeah, I would even say we were the actual second best team that season. We just got Fusion Uni, which is you kind of got dealt the wrong hand. But I do genuinely think we were the second best team that season, and we were 6 people in 3-bedroom apartments, so everyone had to like share a room with a person, which is, as people understand, like later on, like that's just not optimal. No. Like me and Spazzo coming into this, like I'd known Spazzo for so long, we were like amazing friends, and after living together and having all the stress from work and like having to like spend the night together, that shit, like we just at the end we didn't really talk. Like we haven't really recovered our relationship until like recently, actually, just due to like how poor the conditions were. And then what I meant mostly by saying it was like built terribly is that like our coaching staff just wasn't optimal. We didn't have a head coach like at all, so it was just 3 coaches, and I was always like I was the last one to get hired. I was like the one that was like supposed to follow in a sense, like I was supposed to take orders, but there were never any orders. Like I didn't know what I was supposed to do, and I didn't want to go out of my way to like coach opposite of what the other people were doing. So I was just like completely lost all the time what was going on.
That sounds very. It's like, I'm sorry to say, like your experience with like esports, like up until this point, has been like fucking awful, man. Like it has not been like, I'm surprised you actually kept with it after like all of negative.
Yeah, the one thing that's actually really funny is that my best experience. I thought LG was always a lot of fun. LG was like, it was fresh, it was new. I met all these people from all over the world. Like holy shit! Like I've never met people all over the world in the same sense. But after Optic, I was like, okay, this is kind of I'm kind of done again. Like I'm looking to just get something maybe on the side. So my friends Decode and Nex, like I've known these people. Like Decode is Norwegian, so like I've known him for years, right? So they're working with a team called LNL. So I'm like, okay, this is a fun hobby project. I can do this on the side. But I literally thought LNL was going to be rock bottom. I thought this was career suicide. I thought this was the end, right? I don't know, like the season I was on Optic, LNL was like terrible. They were the bottom feeder team that like were both bound to get relegated. So I joined this team. My career's over. I don't really care if it dies at this point. I'll have some fun with actual friends this time. I've known Legit. I've known Sword. I know all these people. So let's have some fun. And then we have this amazing run through contenders. Everyone loves each other on the team. Like I've never had even though we weren't making any money at all, like I had so much fun all the time working with Kate, working with Sephi. Silence is like amazing. He's just like this guy out of France, no one's ever heard of. He shows up to the team and like apparently his brain is just twice the size of any other human being. And then all the players just get along so well. We just like we know how to fuck around. We know how to be serious. Like everything is just great together. So that was kind of what it took to like really push me to see like. First of all, I thought like I blame myself for Optic, but that's kind of what I always do. Like I blame myself. I'm like very like I don't like what's the word for that? Like when you blame yourself.
Self-conscious.
In a sense, yeah. But like when something goes wrong, like I at least self-reflect a lot. I don't really like to blame other people, so I blame myself for Optic. I thought, okay, this is just a testament to my ability. Like I'm just no one. I can't do anything.
Okay. Low self-esteem. Generally, that is associated with low self-esteem, and especially if it's not really all of your fault, but you're just throwing it all on yourself. You're just burdening yourself with it.
But then going into LNL, like I always felt heard. I always felt very well respected, and then like my self-esteem kind of skyrockets it, and then like I start really believing in my ability as a coach. I had like, and we just had fun. Like looking back, imagine if that team was in the house. I'm pretty sure we could have made top 2 easily because we had Lair living in the Russian gulags, like mining during the day, playing Overwatch during the night. We had Decod and Next in Europe, like having their struggles because they're making no money.
Yeah.
And then like the ping as well. Like we're playing with like collectively like over 2,000 ping in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
So like given how realistically shitty LNL circumstances was, like it was just so much fun all the time.
And so I mentioned that that's probably like one of your highlights of your career. Then is LNL has got to be probably one of the best teams that you've ever worked with. So is there something special with the way that team was? So I look at like Overwatch teams, and a lot of times people are put together for like skill, and this kind of goes into like scouting and stuff like that. Was LNL a fluke of you guys just getting the right people together kind of magically, or was there some sort of thought process behind, okay, we're going to pick up these people because you mentioned that you were friends with them, which helps. You also did fairly well, which also helps like mentality wise. Like we were talking earlier, it is a lot easier to be mentally like happy if you're doing better. You had low expectations, like generally speaking. I imagine that most people in LNL did not think that they were going to have that run, that they might do all right. But most people are kind of realistic when they think back about it, like, wow, I wasn't expecting us to do this well at all. So low expectations mean that you don't get let down as much. So what was the secret sauce behind LNL that made that team so good? Like, how did you guys put it together?
LNL was just a group of misfits. Like we were just like the perfect band of misfits. Like all the players were players who have been on considerably shitty teams, not found much success. Like we had Sephi and Legit who were on Shock in season 1, right?
Yep.
They're going to contenders. Like they had a way harder fall than even me, right? Because they're going from like Owl to this team.
The unpaid academy. That is a pretty big,
Yeah, and then you have Silence, who's this like Silence was no one until LNL. Like he was just a Reddit analyst in a sense. Sword had like he was on the uprising. He was about to be on TSM, for example, and then like he kind of just fell off the map. All the players like Decod never really found success outside of the all Norwegian team a few years back. Next was a very high profile. He was a Storm player, and then he kind of fell off the map, and then he never found anything, Overwatch really outside of a few teams. Sugar Free was just like this 14-year-old fucking prodigy who's like just better than every other contenders player for some reason. Lair, who's this Russian player that like is just the hard misfit. He's been playing the game for as long as everyone else, but he just never found the right team. Dogman, who found very good success early on. He had decent success, and then he kind of fell off the map. Ajax as well. He had like a lot of success early on, and then like he just got completely shit on by the entire community in a sense. So like LNL was just the perfect mix of misfits that just made like as close to the perfect like team as possible. Like given better circumstances, I'm convinced we could have done so much better. Like we'd C9 twice on Gibraltar versus Envy. Like we should have won that match. Like realistically, we should have been in the semifinals.
Yeah. So it was a lot of it is a fluke. Then it was just kind of a once in a lifetime thing. Okay, I can kind of understand that. Did that teach you about what you need for a team to succeed? Did that show you like what are some things that you think are important that teams for a team to succeed?
Fun.
Okay.
Just fun. Like look at Valiant.
I do think that is important.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Look at Optic Season 2. Like Optic Season 1, arguably the second best team. At least we made top 4, right? We went to LAN. And then they get relegated the next season because everyone fucking hates each other. There's no fun on the team. Like no one wants to scrim. Valiant, they win stage 4, and they get 0-7 stage 1 season 2 because people just don't like each other. Like if you don't have fun, then what's the point? Like same with Washington. Like we had a terrible stage, but we still have fun. Like we haven't had any internal conflict so far. Like the problems haven't been because of internal conflict or stuff like that. It's just been minor oversteps that have kind of snowballed out of control, combined with one of the harder schedules of all the teams in a sense.
Yeah, you guys did have a harder schedule. So looking back, let's talk about that a little bit. So stage 1, this is always kind of a question because you see what happened with actually Valiant and Moon like being completely let go and released from the team there. How much of your guys' results are a coaching problem or how much of it is a player problem? If you had to put like a percentage. Right, because I mean, obviously, coaches. I should clarify this before someone is like, "Oh, well, they were shit talking." Coaches can only provide tools; they cannot magically make people do things. I would like to clarify. So there is some level of responsibility on players. But if you had to give a percentage, how much was it you weren't teaching correctly or anything like that, or how much of it is like the players not being able to implement?
Two big things that I have after self-reflection kind of figured out was. We didn't build this team for this type of meta. That was never an intention, right? We were building an adaptable team with versatile players, and we went through a meta where we played the same 6 characters for almost the entire stage.
Yeah.
And then we were kind of one thing that I at least personally failed with, and even as a coaching staff, was assessing the level we were at. Like we were trying to coach theoretical perfects or like theoretical bests. Instead of coaching what is best for us. And then like other minor things, like personally, it's been like the change between contenders and OWL. It's just massive. What do you expect from players and how to operate as a team is just so different.
That makes a lot of sense kind of going in here. So you think that a lot of it is that you guys probably at least weren't somewhat prepared for what was going on or what to expect. And then obviously you mentioned even earlier that a lot of it is you are trying to kind of learn on the fly some of the stuff because you're taking more of a coaching role versus an analyst role. So what has that transition been like for you as in a more coaching role? Also, is your camera frozen? I think your camera froze.
Is that? It's working on my end.
Oh yeah, it seems like it might just.
So for my role transition, the analyst title kind of gets thrown around because people just think, oh, he's doing data, which is not really anything I ever did. The analyst tag was just more that me and Silence always worked directly with Sephi, and Sephi would relay what we said to the players. Like we would never directly talk to the players in a sense. I had a lot of actual coaching stuff on LNL still, but my main job was working with Sephi, giving him the stuff to talk about in team meetings and stuff like that. The reason that's kind of why I wanted like the analyst to coaching change was in the beginning it was mostly just a title change because when people see analyst they just think, oh, he does data, which is never something I've really done, right? It's just always been like I've done macro focused stuff and then but he's not really teaching anyone, he's just talking about it. But to actually talk about, like, funnily enough, I actually did have an actual transition in the team later on the stage. So in the beginning, I was mostly doing macro, but towards the end of the stage, we focused a lot more on individual coaching each player. So towards the end, I was mostly working with our Sens, which were Guido and Stratos at the time. So like I was more of like a Sen focused coach.
Okay, so you kind of start to make this transition. That does bring me. I have an odd question for you. How important are titles in Overwatch, or really like esports in general? That's something that I've kind of been slightly annoyed about, especially related towards like mental health. Because you see people being like, a good example is people get called psychologists all the time, and they're not. And in the United States, there's like strict rules about calling yourself a psychologist. So you can't actually use, like, I cannot call myself a psychologist because I don't have a doctoral degree and I'm not licensed in whatever state I'm practicing in. So if you were to move states, you can't call yourself a psychologist in that state, right? So there's like strict rules about like titles, and for most jobs, titles are actually semi-important, like what titles you actually take. In esports in general, what I have sort of kind of seen with titles is that they kind of just get thrown about. So like a good example is I think Sword was considered your guys' performance coach. For LNL, right? But the performance coach there, and then probably what I did are probably very, very drastic things because I have a mental health background. And so it gets very, very confusing when people start taking, if we don't have like a distinction of what is this title actually supposed to do? And you mentioned it with an analyst, like people assume you do data stuff because that's kind of what it's been associated with. And truth be told, that's kind of what I thought too. Because I think of analysts, I think of like Harsha and Baroy, who are probably two of the best known analysts who actually do like number crunching to the best of my ability. Known ability in the league, but you don't tend to do that. So how important are titles, and what kind of titles should we be looking at maybe standardizing?
The reason, so the Sword example is actually a really, really good example for this, because what Sword did on LNL was he was coaching the individual players. He wasn't working on their mental health. He wasn't working on making them happier. He was just giving them feedback as on the role. So like a role as individual coach, like it's just not a pretty word in a sense. That's kind of like why it hasn't been used as a term. So I think that's also like the reason I didn't want to be called an analyst is because I didn't want other potential teams to think I was a data guy, and not to limit my role in other teams, etc. And also I didn't want the fans to think that I'm a data guy, because like then I'll get a bunch of questions like I can't answer because that's not my role, right? So I want my role to reflect like what I'm doing on the team. And like I think having macro coach as a title is a terrible title in a sense. Because it's just it's just a term that doesn't mean anything in a sense. Like it's just made up terms. So that's kind of why I just stuck with it, because it's just like it's a wide enough it's a wide enough title that like it can mean anything, but at least it's somewhat related to what I do on the team.
Okay. So I like how you kind of bring that up there. That's just something that I've kind of noticed that I really wish we would start to standardize, because when I hear about your position, it sounds like you're more of an assistant coach. Like when I hear the stuff that you do, I think, okay, he's an assistant coach, and you can have more than one assistant coach because they're assistants, right? Like if you can have co-head coaches, then you can have assistant coaches. And so when you talk about that, that's what I hear. I think assistant coach. But much like the data thing, it gets very confusing when you start to implement titles that have wide associations for things. So it's a very interesting quandary with like more of the like. Semantics of like esports and how do we start to correct it, because I want to see esports improve and grow and long lasting and all of that kind of stuff. Now you've been involved with the contender scene for a long time. What can we do to make contenders better? Because right now contenders does not feel that great, right? Like it doesn't feel like it necessarily achieves like when you think about contenders, what is the point of contenders, and are we living up to that point? Like what do you think the point of contenders should be?
I think Blizzard really has to decide what they want contenders to be, because right now we're in a terrible middle state. We're not a grassroots type normal like esport where like it's the best team wins. We have so many cheat codes as an academy team. Like you get extra lives. Like if you get like some teams that are supposed to get knocked out, but they're not because they're an academy team. And then we're not a normal type academy / like college football type thing where it's franchise tier 2. I think we need to decide between either. I don't care which one we go for. So either we need to get completely rid of all the academy teams and just have the best team wins and have it as a separate thing from OWL, or we go and have all the academy teams, only academy teams, and make it franchised.
Yeah.
So I feel like right now we're in this like really awkward middle state where we're neither of both. So it just kind of becomes really awkward. It's that like it's so hard for an up and coming team to make a name for themselves, and there's also like as an academy team, you can't just purely focus on talent anymore because like if you lose, you get relegated.
Mm-hmm.
So like if it was franchised, the academy teams would just be farm teams where you pick up players that like in 1 year, 2 year could be potential stars. While now you have to build an actual winning team while picking up talent, which is not ideal.
Yeah. It makes a lot of sense. I know that I had Io Stux on here, and he said that basically Boston's approach, because obviously they're not getting relegated because they're an academy team, is basically to farm talent. That is basically what their whole point of that roster is. And whether or not the rest of the league thinks that way, that's pretty much all that they're doing. And to be fair, Boston has been one of the few teams that it seems that they are willing to sell almost anyone, or at least get rid of. If you pay enough money, they'll figure something out, because it seems like they really believe that they can farm talent and that they're going to utilize whatever resource they have, which I kind of find cool. Also terrifying if you're a player, but I guess you can always look forward to the fact that if you're good enough on Boston, you're probably getting traded to some other team. Like it just,
no respect to them. They have had great success doing what they've been doing.
Yeah,
like they have the most traded, most sold players, and they probably like on just purely player contracts and buyouts, they've probably made a profit, which is actually pretty insane.
Maybe I don't know if they're making profit, but I could see them being, out of all the teams, they are by far probably the closest to doing it. Because I mean, like living in LA is just kind of insane. Like the cost of living in LA is insane, and if you're depending on your living circumstances, that in itself would probably eat up those buyouts that are going through. So, looking forward, you kind of mentioned that with Washington, you guys had made some mistakes, like on the way that you were coaching, as well as like what you had planned for the meta. Are you looking forward to stage 2 and what the differences are going to be coming through stage 2? Do you think that your team is more prepared for what is coming than what you've had?
I mean, we always built our team with adaptability in mind, so I think we're definitely going to do better, at least. Even just looking at our schedule is a lot weaker than stage 1. Mm-hmm. We have a middle of the pack schedule. Mm-hmm. So it's not terribly easy, but it's also not terribly hard like stage 1. So like just purely going in from stage 1, we have an easier schedule. We have very adaptable players. I feel very confident in us picking up whatever is coming up fairly quick, which is very good when you only have 1 week of scrims before your game. So if what I'm hearing is true about the next meta, then the shakeups aren't massive. There's a few shakeups, but at least I think there's a lot of teams right now from stage 1 that did well that aren't going to do very well if there's like massive shakeups in a sense.
Okay. That makes sense. So I have one last set of questions, and then we're actually gotten through most of my questions, which is kind of cool that I've kind of come up here. So you had recently been on Volamail's podcast, probably like 2 months ago, maybe even 3 months ago now.
It was right before I moved.
Yeah. So, and one of the things you had talked about was mental health, and you had talked about it before getting into kind of like Overwatch League, right? And me having, when I first heard it, I was like, oh God, I'm going to kill him. Not really, but there was some things that kind of like irked, because like one of the things you had said was that solo queue isn't stressful, which if you see Twitter and everyone bitching about solo queue, it definitely is, like, in my opinion, is definitely stressing. We have different like things that what lead to burnout, probably like different definitions of what burnout is. Having experienced Overwatch League, is it more stressful or less stressful than you were expecting?
Yeah, given our record, it's a lot more stressful than I thought it would be. Like, if we were middle of the pack and like I would have the time to like.
Hang on.
It's back, right?
Yeah, we're good.
But yeah, so given the fact that like we had a very rough stage 1, we just had to work a lot extra, and then I had to spend a lot of my time in the off stage. Like, we had to think about what we're changing for stage 2. We picked up a new player, like that. I'll add a lot of work, stuff like that. So I think it's close to impossible to expect the level of intensity and stress that OWL actually has. Like, I don't think anything really compares to it. Like, at least in esports, like even looking at other esports, they're so developed that there's at least like some like balancing there.
Yeah.
While Overwatch is so new, you're on a completely new team. Like our owners had never been in esports before. That's a completely new project. So there's a lot of growing pains that adds stress, adds like extra work, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I said, I knew because I had worked the year before, and I was like, oh, dude, you are in for a fucking surprise. Especially, like, a good example, and this is something that is coming, I really wish that Blizzard maybe would take, I mean, I understand what they did. So what Blizzard is, they obviously, they made sure there was less games, and they tried to include longer breaks, and that was never really the problem. It was definitely part of the problem, but it wasn't like the actual issue. Actually, the bigger issue is the fact that they patch in between stages. Yeah. Right? And that is really what leads to more work and more stress. And if they were to not do that, that would actually probably there's a larger likelihood I expect teams to give time off than they would now. If they were to change some of that stuff around. At least teams that did good might take a little bit more time off. I don't know if teams that did bad would, but basically the idea is that you have like a week and a half to learn an entirely new game functionally, because it might be 1 or 2 changes, but those 1 or 2 changes might affect everything. So that being said, you probably don't, like, you're in between stages now. I'm imagining you guys don't get a ton of time off. I'm guessing like maybe 3 or 4 days, right?
We had an actual full week, so we had 6 days because we didn't have stage playoffs, which is like it gives, because I think it used to be 10 days, but now it's a little bit more than 2 weeks between stages. So since we didn't make stage playoffs, we had a few extra days. We had people go back home and stuff like that. So
okay, well, it's good on you guys for doing that. So.
Kind of one thing I want to touch on, which I like your point about having a new patch between each stage is very, like, it adds a lot of stress. But I also think the way they did it with stage 1 was pretty bad when they kept the meta that's been there for close to 6 months. So I think season 1 was an example of a bit too harsh, because season 1 they changed it right before the season started, when like you had a bunch of loser players completely like brain dead on Mercy. Mm-hmm. When they didn't really have the time to prep, they didn't really know which patch it was going to be for like close to the league. So, and then now it's very different because we didn't know, so we weren't building for GOATs because we didn't know it's going to be GOATs, and then it's GOATs. Yeah. So the people who had experience from World Cup, contenders, etc., like kind of got a bit of a cheat in stage 1.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think that, in my mind, this would be the way that they patch it. They'd patch right before stage 1, maybe a month or 2 out. That would give teams enough time to kind of practice and scrim. Then they would probably patch in between 2 and 3. Yeah. And then probably not, that would probably be the only, I'd probably only do 2 patches, like ideally, is before 1 and then between 2 and 3. So you get a split in between there, maybe some minor patches in between 1 and 2, but nothing significant is... I don't know. I like stability a lot more for mental health, though. Like that's where like watching a game, it is much funner to watch a game that changes every stage, like 100%. But for mental health, it is much better if they were to limit the patches that happen.
Yeah, the only 2 main issues I see with that is that, first of all, Blizzard likes to do smaller patches more consistently. Yeah. So for that to happen, that would have to be 2 massive shakeups where like everything is completely different, which is not something Blizzard is very known to do.
Yeah. No.
And secondly, then you only have, like, you can roll a dice and be really good at stage 1 and stage 2 and make playoffs just because you picked up 1-trick players that are really good for that meta, because you might go 6-1 and then 5-2, and then you have enough wins to make like the wild card or like even actual season playoffs, which is unfair to teams that are building championship level teams that might have one really weak stage.
Mm-hmm. I guess that's
like, like, think about Philly, the second best team last season, right? They did fairly poorly, like stage 1.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry about cutting you off.
No, you're good. I agree. I can see how that would kind of go through there. So what do you want to reward though? Do you want to reward so you mentioned that your team you built for adaptability. Okay, which kind of hurt you for stage 1 because it was something that teams who had been around longer that obviously they had built up and they had gotten cohesion and they had kind of solidified there that they had the best play for what that was because they had been practicing it, which is more of a traditional, I would guess, sports model, is the idea that the game doesn't really change, and so it's about who can play whatever's there the best, not necessarily adapt the quickest, right? Yeah. So would you prefer people to reward adaptability or just the best play possible?
but I think also adaptability in esports has always been a key to being the best player possible, right? That's kind of why everyone always looks at NYXL and calls them the best team, because they have never looked like, I don't think NYXL has ever looked bad. They've always looked top 4, top 2. Yeah, which is incredibly like Fuel was credited as a really good team towards the end of season 1 when they were terrible for 3 stages and pretty good last stage, right? So I think the characteristics of a team is a team that's going to do well no matter what. So like I wouldn't go at us and say we're a great team because we've had a bad stage 1 due to just not being the best team. Yeah. While a team like NYXL, I feel like they're in my mind, at least for a very long time, always going to be the best team, even though they didn't win, because they're going to come into stage 2 and be just as good, if not better. While a team like Titans, a team like Shock, a team like Seoul, they might have a terrible stage because they're just not prepared for the meta, because they're not taught, they're not coached, and they don't operate in a way that is very long-term based. They're very like stage by stage focused. Yeah. Well, I think NYXL, even if the coaches left, I think they would do very above average in a stage, even if they didn't have any coaching, just how players operate and how they're taught.
Makes a lot of sense to me. So I have one last question for you. Arguably the hardest question. Everyone always complains about this question, and I can't help that. So the last question. You've had the experience being on here. This is a much different like show than probably anything you've been on, at least to my knowledge, which is kind of cool. It's unique, makes it flavorful. Having had this experience, if you could see any one person on here, the only requirement is that they do need to be able to speak English fluently, and they need to be involved in some way in esports. It does not have to be with Overwatch. It can be with other games. It can be behind the scenes. They just need to be involved in esports. Who would you pick?
Silence. Because I don't think anyone knows who Silence is. I barely even know who Silence is. So I like the reason I really like the show is because you barely asked me anything about Overwatch, which is fantastic. Get my mind off this fucking game for at least an hour and I'm happy. So, and then you're putting backstories to people that people just know for the game. Like you give more insight into people that people normally wouldn't understand or normally look up. So a person like Silence would be amazing to have on the show if he would even agree in the first place. But he's like Batman. I don't know who Silence is. I just know he's a great mind for the game.
Fucking, we're gonna have Batman on. Okay. Do you have any shout outs? Because normally I don't do them, but if you do, I'll let you have them.
I mean, anything I want to shout out, I can shout out my Twitter, I guess.
That's true. Yeah. Okay. There you go. Your Twitter's already gonna be shown there because I am good. Okay. But if you guys are curious, it's mKL_OW for any of my podcast listeners. But it's
shout outs to Washington Justice for picking up my stupid ass. I don't know why. Shout out to Kate for picking up my stupid ass. I still don't know why. Shout out to Wizard for not firing my ass. I don't know why. And yeah, thank you to all the fans. Like I met so many amazing fans at the arena and people who DM me every day, and it's fantastic to just experience talking to the fans.
Okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this has been Deep Dives into the Minds of Esports. My name is Blake Panashevitz, and until next time when we have Batman on this show, I hope you all have a wonderful day.